everyone. So today we're discussing chapters 3 and chapter 4. So my first quote for chapter 3 is about texting. In fact, many people consider texting to be a form of oral or spoken communication rather than a form of written communication. I find this to be very true in the way that I communicate with others over text and in the way that others communicate with me over text. When I text, my writing is much different than when I write emails. I view email as a written communication and construct messages carefully. When I text, I write as if I were speaking aloud. I believe we do this because of the instantaneous nature of texts. When we send something and the other person can read it almost instantly, it's almost like communicating back and forth out loud, even though it's written. I believe it's important to realize this when sending and receiving text messages. Someone might say something that over text that would be easily communicated over verbal communication, but would be not as easily or as frequently communicated via email. You might communicate something that you need to say quickly and use a text instead of a phone call. I think it's important to be aware of texting etiquette and to be careful in how you use that in the workplace. The second quote that I chose is, "Nonverbal messages form relationships." I believe this one is very true. If you think about people who use nonverbals or don't, the people that don't use nonverbals seem to have trouble building relationship. This may just be the way it appears to us, but we have a hard time empathizing with people who don't use nonverbals, and it can be challenging to understand them or feel like you're getting through to them. It might seem like it'd be better to conceal nonverbals, just like it may seem like it's better to conceal emotions, but I think that both of these things are important for people in communicating and in building relationships. One of the quotes that I chose from chapter 4 was, "Listening is the process of receiving." When we listen, not only do we hear the messages, but we also decode or assign meaning to them, and we respond to the other person by letting him or her know the message was received. I think this is important because I think a lot of people nowadays, and probably for all of time, have been good at hearing and not actually listening. A lot of times when I'm at work, I find that I am hearing people, but I'm not actually listening to them. I often fall into the trap of multitasking. I have learned to nod and provide verbal utterances that make it sound like I'm following the conversation. I nod and say, and I fall into a pattern of doing that without even being conscious of it and indicate to the other person that I'm listening, when really I'm only hearing what they're saying. I think this is a challenging but important habit to break because not actually listening communicates to the other person that you don't value them or what they're saying. And it's important to hear the details anyway, so breaking the habit of multitasking is really important. The other quote I chose from chapter 4 is that we synthesize and interpret nonverbal cues along 3 primary dimensions: pleasure or liking, arousal or interest, and dominance or status. I think that the author is saying here that we not only communicate verbally through these 3 dimensions, and we also communicate non-verbally when we're listening through these 3 dimensions. When I talk about something, like, for instance, backpacking, I like that subject, so I'm interested and I can talk for a long time about it. It's something I'm comfortable talking about. Another subject that I like to talk about is India. However, that is a topic where I am more interested than finding it easy to talk about. I am interested in learning more about it, and therefore I find it interesting to talk about it. I've visited India several times and like to talk about my experiences there. As far as an example of where I have talked, where I demonstrate status through what I'm talking about, I used to show livestock at the county fair, and one of the categories of livestock I showed was goats. I knew a lot about goats and was a top showman for several years in a row. I could talk about them with an air of status because I had a lot of knowledge on the topic. I think people also demonstrate these dimensions when they are listening. People lean in or nod their head to show that they like what the other person is saying. When people are interested, they show excited expressions, and when people are conveying status, they tend to talk or input more into the conversation. So those are the quotes that I discussed for this week, and I'll talk to you again next week.